using will actually work. So my name is Tim Wong. Most of you, if you're in Slack, you'll know me as one of the student leaders in the AMA sessions. Anne is also one of our student leaders, and which kind of rotate trying to help out people in the Slack forums. And I've been in three, including this one, three different Udacity scholarships. So my first one was data science. The one I did last year was for Devops, and this year is for AI, AI for business. So I'm just going to share, I guess let me present now, and I can go into a little bit more about me, but that is not why you came here to know more about me. Or maybe it is. All right. I'm presenting my screen. You should see big orange stuff. If you're using WebEx or Zoom, we probably have gestures. You can give me a thumbs up. But if you can't see it, just somebody let me know. So a little bit of background about me. I'm going to talk about my experience as a software developer and kind of tips for interviewing. I do interviews and phone screens for my company, so I figured there's a lot of people who are in the scholarship who are from very different experience levels. So you got people who are still in college, who are students, and so one of the things is like, well, how do I make money? So you got to go on interviews typically, especially if you're trying to get an AI job. But I can share my experience with what I do. So yeah, so a little bit about me. That's a picture that my wife took. I've been doing martial arts for like a super long time. This is one of my favorite photos. I started when I was about 12 years old, and I'm a little bit over 40 right now. So do the math. I've been doing it for more than half my life. I will share this slideshow after the meeting, so you can take a look at my LinkedIn profile if you're really interested. Um, so yeah, I use a lot of the reason why this is important between me being a developer and me being a martial artist. There's actually a lot that are parallel and in common. So I use the skills that I learn in business in my, when I teach my students, and I use a lot of things that I learn when I teach from my martial arts to into business. So it's kind of pretty cool. I live right here in the state of North Carolina. I grew up in New Jersey over here. My family is from Hong Kong and China, so I am a first generation um, uh, Chinese born American. And so especially with kind of the situation the US is, I kind of have a soft spot for all the craziness that's going on with the immigration. I don't want to get too much into politics, but I have a tendency to really kind of, because of my upbringing, to look at both sides of the fence when we're, talking about people who are in lesser situations. I know we have a lot of people in this scholarship who are from outside of the U.S. I know that the common probably stereotype um, is like if you're from people in the U.S. only think about the U.S. Like our geography is horrible. It's pretty much true as far as the geography part. But because I have a lot of people who are from friends and family from China or from India, I kind of make sure I try to, when I answer a question, I'm really clear. Like I can give you my perspective based on being in the U.S. Maybe you can apply some of those things based on where you live, but I try to be like sensitive to the fact, everything I say is not exactly true, but it works for my situation and where I live. So yeah, I do software development, and this is a pretty funny meme, because it's like you've probably seen this for other things in life, like as a MMA fighter, as a CEO. So like this is like what my mom thinks I plays video games all day. No, my mom actually thinks I'm tech support. So my parents always call me for tech support, and I'm like, I program stuff. I don't know if I can help you with that, but um, I always like see stuff like this, and it makes me laugh. So yeah, I kind of put this in here because I really want to stress, especially with like what I see in the program, is a lot of people ask in Slack, like, well, I want to learn Python, or I want to learn C sharp, or I want to learn Angular. And I'm like, well, here's my question to you. Why do you want to learn Angular? Why do you want to learn this programming language? Um, when you're looking at things like machine learning or artificial intelligence, there are programming languages that cater to that domain of programming. So like the typical ones are like R sharp and Python are probably the most prevalent programming languages for machine learning. There are other languages you can use, but predominantly anyone in that space, the data science space, will probably be using Python. So like if you say, I'm trying to get a job in machine learning or data science, I'm like, well, yeah, Python's probably the way you want to go. But if you're trying to learn Java, it's probably not. So, this is a pretty common thing, saying don't put the cart before the horse. Figure out what you want to solve, and then you can choose the programming language you want to learn. And this is especially good advice for like newer people in development. I think for people who have been doing software development for 5, 10, 15 plus years, you probably have good knowledge about, you have your core, like, if you're a Microsoft developer, you're going to know probably C sharp or VB. But as you've been doing development longer, you want to expand your knowledge. So you might like try to learn a new programming language once a year. And the same thing goes true for what this track is about. A lot of people are talking about trying to solve, learn these things. And my question to them is, well, what are you trying to solve? One of the last lessons in what we're doing is about knowing the problem, figuring out what the problem is to solve, and that's your business case, right? If you don't know that, trying to do all this other stuff is kind of less important than figuring out what you're trying to solve. With software development, you can do a lot of different things. You can do web applications or things on the web. You can make desktop applications, IoT or Internet of Things. So that Internet of Things, if you've never heard of that, is if you know what a Raspberry Pi is or Arduino, it's like being able to program a device to like a microcontroller or a mini computer. IoT is like the your smart devices. So like I can program my Alexa or the little things you can plug into your wall to control the lights going on and off with your voice. So that's kind of IoT type stuff. Um, DevOps is another kind of newer space, but that involves being able to program to deploy code and maintain infrastructure. If you want to make a decent money, DevOps is definitely a good thing to do. This is kind of newer, but like test automation. So it's being able to like test software using code. That kind of seems like Inception. But that's another thing that you can get good at. AI and ML, of course, and then also security. I only put a couple languages here, but my specialty is I've been doing 20 plus years of web development. I do mostly .NET, and the cloud, our cloud of choice at where I work is Azure, which is Microsoft, C Sharp, which is an object-oriented language, JavaScript your front end, and SQL. SQL is like your database, it keeps all your information. So that's my primary specialty. So if anyone has any questions about that, like how do I learn this, how do I do that, definitely connect with me and I can probably help you or point you in the right direction. So I'm going to go into this because I really kind of wanted to focus like this thing on trying to figure out what you want to do with your career in software development. Now, this you can kind of translate the same kind of steps into like machine learning or AI. It's kind of like the same way I think about it. So I'm actually going to exit out of the presentation. Let's see, let me go back. All right, so I'll include these links in this Google Slides. But so if you do software development, you're probably very familiar with Stack Overflow. If you ever are trying to code and you don't know how to figure out something, you're probably going to go to Stack Overflow.
Yeah, true. Stack Overflow. I've joined it before. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, every time I ask someone in an interview, I'm like, what's your mental checklist of trying to figure out, how to figure out a problem or a bug, you should be saying Stack Overflow. They do a survey every year um, for all the developers that use their forums on like what you know gender, what programming languages you use, what business you're in. So this is like really cool to see the change year over year on like what programming language you use. So if you're not a developer, you're not a programmer, or you're trying to get into it and you're trying to figure out, well, how am I going to, especially people who are trying to switch careers, like what should I, where do I start? I mean, when I started doing software development, you had some Microsoft stuff, Java, COBOL, Python, but there wasn't like what it is now. It's almost like you're a kid in a candy shop. There's so many different programming languages and tools. It is so hard to figure out what to do.
Is COBOL actually used these days anyway? I think it's one of the oldest.
I will tell you, if you know COBOL, you have good job security. So I
Really?
believe, yeah,
Okay.
so
All
it
right.
is, if you work in the banking industry, or at least in the US, like Social Security, if you have a job if you know COBOL. And the reason why that is because it's such an old programming language. It's only used on certain systems. And because it's so expensive to upgrade those systems, it's less expensive to find a COBOL developer than it is to upgrade your entire software. So there is a space for learning these old languages, but you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into doing that. I don't know if you want to work at some of these places for the rest of your life, but if that's your cup of tea, I mean, go for it. So there are a couple links in my presentation, and I'll go to here. So I was talking about if you're in a position that you're learning, you're trying to get into the industry or you're trying to change careers into this industry. Well, what do I start with? Okay, so um, that's not the right one. Here we go. So the most, it says, unsurprisingly for the 8th-year-old, JavaScript has maintained its stronghold as the mostly commonly used programming language. And then it goes further down the list. So everything today is on the web. It's either on the web or it's on a mobile device. And I would venture to say at this point today, just about everyone has a mobile phone, but not everyone has a laptop or a computer. And I know in our company, there's software that we use to keep track of when a visitor hits our website, how are they accessing our website? Are they using Google Chrome? Are they using Internet Explorer? Are they using a mobile browser? So we keep track of statistics, and I would venture to say that, especially outside of the US, that's probably more true than inside the US. There's a lot of people who have access to mobile phones. So if you want to start doing programming, you can make mobile apps using JavaScript. So there's like React Native, and you can learn Angular and program in Ionic, and make a mobile app. I've had some limited experience with Ionic. It's not great, but it's a JavaScript based programming language. SQL's high up there. Everything that you touch, usually, it's not just like pretty pictures and pretty words and making websites look pretty. Every time, like if you go to your bank website, that something has to power the data that comes up to, your user interface. So SQL is a fairly common language to learn for databases. There's NoSQL databases too, but that's kind of something else. So this link is in there, but like, hey, if you want to figure out what I want to do, what I want to learn, this is like a it's a good guesstimate on what you should try to learn. And then you can switch to professional developers. I will go here. There is something. So the links are sublinks within this page. It's huge. But like if you're interested in trying to figure out like which is going to make me the most money, there is a section in here that will go through like which job positions as far as programming will make the most money. I'm trying to figure out where it is. Here we go. Top paying technologies. So if you want to make like good money, I guess starting out, you would learn Perl or Scala or Go. These are Perl's been around for a really long time. Um, Scale and Go are like Go is a little bit newer. I think it was made by Google. Um, but like globally, Perl, if you live in the US, it changes a little bit. Stack Overflow is a US based technology or company. And there's also something in here about like positions. Let me see if I can go back here. Salary by developer type. This is what I wanted to go to. All right, so like you can see a data engineer, which I guess would be like a DBA.
Uh, is it very easy? I mean, starting by learning how to create apps, I think, isn't that a bit difficult for a beginner?
Yes and no. It probably depends on the programming language you choose. And here's why. If you use something, or if you try to learn something that is commonly used, chances are is A, they're going to have good documentation, and B, there's going to be supporting websites with like getting started tutorials. How do I build a Hello World app? How do I build a Hello World website using Python, using C Sharp, using Node.js? So, like if you try to do it with Go, do build an app with Go, you probably have not as friendly, and someone could correct me if I'm wrong. You're probably more likely to, like if you use .NET, there's tons of documentation, tons of tutorials that you can look to build your first app. And I think it's not as hard as people might think. Um, Another great resource I would actually recommend is going on YouTube. Some of us don't like watching video, but there's tons of people on YouTube that I can go type in C sharp build web app, and you would probably find 20 videos of people live coding and building their first, web application. So hopefully that kind of answer your question. But
Thank you
anyway,
very much. Yeah.
yeah. So the Stack Overflow, this survey, they'll do one. I don't know if this was the last one that came out. I think it was, but like there should be something like DevOps specialist here. I'm what they consider a full stack engineer, which is I work on showing the data and also the stuff that, processes the logic behind the scenes. But there should be something in here. I don't know if they lump in data scientists here, but you can look at this. I'll share the links later. But I thought that was really interesting, especially for people like who don't know where to get started. Use,
I thought they were saying data science was the highest paid job, especially in the United States.
um, I think it
Or it's gone
depends.
down a bit, or because of the saturation.
It could be. So I am not a data scientist by career, so I don't know too much about it. I would say it is definitely a hot market, and because it's high demand, low. I hate to objectify people, but low inventory. There's not a lot of data scientists because it's fairly new. Chances are like if you jump in and you know what you're doing, you're going to be paid more. Like a entry level data scientist will probably make more than an entry level developer. But they, like I said, I'm kind of guessing. It's all about supply and demand. I think for what I do is pretty high demand because I'm hiring and I cannot find. It's hard to find a good developer. Um, So I would say, don't quote me on anything, but kind of look at this and do your own research. Like my job today is to really just kind of share my experience and have you do the research. One of the sayings I was telling someone the other day that's common amongst programmers is, "In God we trust. All others bring data." So make sure you do your research. I can kind of say my opinion, but I always tell my coworkers, hey, if I'm not, if I said something and it's not true, please correct me. Because I'm not, I hate to say I'm the expert. I am not the expert. I have a lot of experience, but I'm not the expert. All right. So interviewing tips. So yeah, like I said, where I work for, I work for a company called Relias. They're actually a subsidiary of Bertelsmann, and that's how I got involved in these scholarships. Um, so I phone screen people and I interview people. And mostly it's on the technical side. Um, but there are some general interview tips I would give for anyone. So first and foremost, I try to not intimidate people when I interview them, but I would say, like, if you go to Google or Amazon, um, and you try to interview with them, they are like the exception to the rule. They are like the top 10% of all companies on the planet. And they want the smartest and brightest people. So they're going to really, really, make sure you know your stuff. So if you're doing them, you would expect to like uh, whiteboard problems. So they might give you a problem. I'll give you something that's really commonly used in software interviews. You can look this up, but the problem is like a FizzBuzz solution. And it's basically there's a loop and a counter, and it's like on odd numbers, we want to print out the word fizz. On even numbers, you want to print out the word buzz, and it's something like that. I'm messing it up, but it's a very simple and commonly used programming challenge to make sure like the person kind of knows how to do that. It's pretty, if you've been programming for a while, it's pretty simple. Um, so anyway, do your homework. The first thing I ask is like, well, why do you want to join the company that I'm with right now? And that shows the interviewer that you did your homework, that you researched the company. So I'll give you an example. With Relias, we are in the healthcare industry. And one of the things that I said when I interviewed with the company was, I have had family members who have passed away or have been really ill, and I just think it's amazing, if there's something that I can do in your company to help the doctors and the nurses who use our software to make them better at their job. So if my grandmother or grandfather ever went into a doctor that uses your software, that would be really cool. My work has direct impact on other people. So that's just using an example. Now, not every company is going to be in the healthcare industry, but just know what the company does, and it shows the interviewer that you care enough to know, what you want to do, because they are trying to invest in you. They don't want a guy that's just working at the company for a paycheck necessarily. I mean, we all have to get paid, but they want you there for the long haul. I think the average software developer, at least in the United States, stays at their position maybe 2 to 5 years before leaving another company. It is very common. So, the more vested you are in them, they know like this person's serious about our company. I feel good about this person. Brush up on your technical knowledge. So what does that mean? So if you're a Java programmer and you go to a company and they don't use Java, that's a problem. Unless let's say they do C sharp. That's the primary programming language they use. Unless
Is
you
it
like,
C sharp with the VS code? Sorry, VS Visual
yeah, you
Studio.
can you can use C sharp with either VS Code or the
Oh,
traditional Visual
okay.
Studio. Yeah, so
All
you
right.
can do it in both. But yeah, they're the company is going to ask you Java questions or C sharp questions because that's what they do. They don't use Java. But conversely, realistically speaking, when you reach out to someone, the job position will tell you like you have to have 5 years of experience with this programming language. That so usually you're not like completely going, but usually when you apply for a position, you're not going to know everything, but you're going to know most of the programming languages that they use. They should be familiar with what you do. Um,
Uh, Timothy, I have a question.
sure.
Uh, some of the questions that I've seen in the test, I like if I were in the university. I mean, they are very prepared, but they aren't the real life. What do you think of this type of question? They are very, very like if I were in the school.
Right. So that's a great question. And there's actually been a lot of debate in the IT industry about the right and wrong way to interview people. So I would say at the average company, and again, this is my opinion, so it's not based on fact, but this is based on my experience being at different companies. Uh, if I give you a problem to solve It needs to be realistic. Like if I test, do you know how to do quick sort? Or do you know how to, can you create a linked list for me?
Yeah, had to remember all those terms from the university.
Yeah, like for me at my company, I'm not going to do that because it's not realistic. Like how often are you going to program a linked list on the job? You're not. There's like built-in data
Yeah, that's
structures
right.
into your programming language, like especially C sharp. Like I don't write a linked list on a daily basis. Um, there are companies that do that because that's the way they've done it all the time. I will say, like the Amazons and the Googles, they are more likely to test on algorithmic type questions because that chances are the work they do involves a programmer knowing how to make things more efficient. And so you have to be able to understand certain things. The other case where people may do that is if you're coming out of university because you have no or very little work related experience. So they have to try to figure out a way to test you on something. So I would say like I'm trying to remember. So I went to college like 20 over 20 years ago. So like the recollection of how I got a job right out of college is kind of iffy. But I would say they're probably going to test you on things that are related to common coursework in computer science. So data structures, if I remember correctly, and I think people are still doing data structure classes as computer science majors. That is like learning binary trees and lists and linked lists. So as long as you understand the general way of how they work, you should be able to code that somehow. There's a book out there on Amazon too. It's someone who specifically wrote how to interview with the bigger companies. The book is like pretty thick. It's actually a pretty good book to read. What was that?
The cracking code, I guess.
Yes, cracking the code.
The
That's
cracking the
it's a big book, but it's really good. It kind of makes you think about things that you don't think about for a while. So, um, you know, for what I did, they might ask you because I'm a senior level person. They probably won't ask you the lower level stuff, but they're going to ask you. For me, it's not just about you can't just be smart about do you know how to do this? At my level, you have to be able to do that and you have to know why. It's like, okay, we want to use this programming language. Or we want to be able to we want to be able to implement a search functionality on our website. Okay, I know how to do that. There's a ton of different services out there. Azure, Amazon Web Services, different programming languages. It's not just good enough to say, I know how to do it. You also have to be smart enough when you're experienced to know why, because there's a right tool for the right job. And so maybe you don't know necessarily, but you have to be experienced enough that if you're given that project at work, you have to be able to do the research to understand the pros and cons of doing something one way or another way, balancing those pros and cons, and then you go back to your team and say, hey, we have this, this, and this. I pick option C because it does all these things. And then your team gets to discuss. I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent, but yeah, I don't necessarily believe like testing someone on writing up a linked list is necessarily a good test of seeing how good of a programmer they are. But some
Okay,
people
thank
do. Yeah, some
yeah.
people do.
Okay, thank you.
Um, Dress to impress. So we're all in a really weird situation right now. I work from home all the time because they shut down the office. I think it's really nice if you dress up, at least from the waist up on the camera, that you are making the effort to be impressionable. Of course, when you're in person, you want to do that. One time I interviewed a person. He came in with a nice shirt, shorts, and sandals. And no matter how smart he was, it was a huge turnoff to the rest of the people who were interviewing him because he just didn't take the time to do something like that. Now, if that's your company culture and you're fine with that, then you're okay. But if you're going to interview for the job, you don't know. It's better safe than sorry to overdress than underdress. And the last one that I have is work on projects. So there's a lot of people who are, again, they're trying to get into software development and they don't have job experience. So guess what? Make your own projects. The easiest project that I can tell anyone, and especially if you're new to programming, really easy project to do. Make a to-do list app. So what I'm like, that kind of sounded weird. So let me kind of describe. Make an app that you can add a to-do item like a grocery list. You can delete the item. You can show a list of your items that you have to do for that day. That is the perfect, simple application to develop with very minimal functionality. So it's really, you can do it in any language you want, and it's a very simple thing to do. It will get you like well versed with the programming language, and like also a database as well, because you have to like save that data. And then once you do that, don't just like store it on your computer, but actually post your code on GitHub. Or if you're doing like not traditional programming like I am, like you're doing like if you're just a front end developer. So the way I put this, if you're a front end developer, I use this analogy like cars. So when you get into a car accident, you need your car fixed, you go to an automobile shop, and all they do is fix the exterior of your car. They make it look pretty. The mechanic is the one that fixes the engine and your axle and all the inner workings of making the car move. That's kind of more like me. I lean more toward being a back-end developer. But if you're a front-end developer, you want a good portfolio showing that you can make websites look really good and that they're user-friendly and that they're intuitive. So I'll give you an example. If you don't know what GitHub is, they got bought up by Microsoft. So I know a lot of people don't like Microsoft for various reasons, but let me see if I can sign in.
They've manipulated the market and they've monopolized the market. Probably that's why people are scared of Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, though, right? It's still free, so I can post stuff and put stuff up, and it's still free. So this is my GitHub repository, and so I have my code here. So there was every year they do this thing called the Advent of Christmas. And so it's these programming challenges every day for like the entire day up until Christmas. And so I decided I wanted to do this. So I post my code. You can see my code. People can download my code and try it out. Okay, so everyone knows the AMAs that we have with Udacity. So I wrote an application in React and Java, because JavaScript is what React is based off of. And so you can actually take this app and run it on your laptop if you download my code. You just have to sign up for Firebase, which is a database, and put in some settings, and then you can get this working. So what we use here, let's see, I don't even remember my website name. Hold on. It's still a work in progress. So it's like, most of you probably see this, right? But what you don't see is this. So I made this for the student leaders in the AMA. And so like, this is how they add stuff to here. So they can, there's an editor here. I can go here and add in stuff. So I did that, and I was like, you know what? It would be a really good idea for everyone who's trying to like figure out how to build a website like this. Let me post my code. And so if you go to interview with somebody and you say, here's my link to my GitHub repository, they have basically a portfolio of all the work that you've been doing. It's a really great way to actually show people you're involved, doing code and liking that, that you like to code. Now, I have a wife and 2 kids. I personally do not expect people who have full-time jobs to be spending their free time doing more work as a software developer. So there's like that balance. But I enjoy programming because I feel like it's an art form. It's trying to figure out how to figure out a problem using code. So for me, it's actually fun for me to try to write stuff like this. But you know, that's not everybody. But if you're trying to break into the market and you don't have a lot of experience, like try to figure out, you know, something to do and code it and then post it on GitHub. Trying to think about what else. That's generally my advice on interviewing. The other thing I would say about interviewing is I hate it when people lie. Interviewers will know almost right away when you're starting to lie. It is perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know the answer to that. Can I try to answer it the best I can? And 9 out of 10 times they're going to be like, sure, at least you took the effort to try and you let me know that I'm not sure. And look, interviewing is like dating. All right, you have to make sure you're a good fit for the company and that the company is also looking at you the same way. Are they a good fit for me? If you've ever been dating, you know that sometimes before you get married, you have to go on a lot of dates. Now, I know some people in the world, you know, the dating situation in the United States is very different than how people date in other places. So I apologize, but this is the dating analogy in the United States. It might take you 5, 10 interviews before you get your job. And that's kind of intimidating because you kind of feel like I didn't get the job. I didn't get the job. I didn't get the job. I understand. I've been in those shoes. It's very like, it's very disheartening. But I want you to think about it this way. Every time you go on an interview and you don't know a question, write it down. Write it down, take a note. Then afterwards, you can look up the answer and try to figure it out. I almost guarantee you, you're going to run into the same questions or a subset of the same questions on the next interview you go to. So just think about the interview as not like, you know, oh my gosh, I really want this job. Of course you really want the job. But think of it as a learning experience. And you know, if you everyone knows who Thomas Edison is, you know, he invented the light bulb. Although I don't think that's quite true. I think but he's known for inventing the light bulb. And I think I don't know if it's a true story or not, but they used to say like, Tom, you still haven't invented the light bulb yet. Why don't you just give up? And this response back was, I've just figured out the 1,000 ways it doesn't work. And that's kind of the mentality you have to have. You have to just be willing to learn and try to learn from mistakes and just get better every single time. I'm going to answer a couple questions in here. So the password manager I was using is called Bitwarden. I used to use LastPass, but I think they got bought out by a company that has some security issues. Bitwarden is actually very similar to LastPass, and I'll show it here. It's open source, so you can actually host the server on your own private like VM or server, and that way all your data is like local to that VM. What if most of your work on GitHub is private? That is a good question too. So actually, let me see. I'm trying to think if I have any private repository. Here we go, private. All right, so that's a great question. So my question would be is, if it's private, but you don't want it to actually be private, I think like if I go here, yeah, I can change and I can make it public, all right? The second thing you can do is if there is something sensitive, you can fork your repository or you can clone it, and then you can actually resubmit a new repository and change the code you have that's sensitive, and then make that repository public. So Alex, private in the private, yeah. Do you consider that it's necessary to have a bachelor's degree to get a job as a developer or a data scientist? Okay, that is a really good question as well. I will say that, and I can only say this from my experience being in the US. I will say if you're really good at programming, you have we call the knack. Like it becomes easy to you understanding the concepts and being able to code. I won't say it's necessary, but you have to be able to back up your ability to code. I'll give you a perfect example. I used to work at a startup company, and my boss, who was the CTO, he did not have a bachelor's degree. He was one of the smartest people I have ever met. And for the 2, 3 years I spent at that company, I probably learned more about software development and cloud than any other company I've been at. Um, but he's very motivated. He's really smart. He just has this knack for learning things. I have a bachelor's degree, and I do think there are some pros to it. But I think when I when I was in college 20 years ago, it was less expensive than it is now. It's definitely less expensive 30, 40 years ago. I think the challenge that a lot of people are meeting is that going the cost of college, at least in the United States, is just astronomical. Um, so not necessary, but it certainly helps. But I can't answer that for data science. There's actually someone who's doing data science for professionally at another talk, I think either earlier or later, and they're going to talk about data science as a profession. Um, what if you don't want your code public? Um, so that's entirely up to you. If you don't have your code public, my recommendation is to create another repository and write some code, like write an app that you do feel like you want public. But I understand that certain people don't want their code they want their code private because it's like I don't want anyone to know about it, and that's perfectly fine. I studied 2 bachelors and couldn't finish any. Do you think it's bad to put it on the resume? All right, I'm gonna be honest with you, Daniel. When I look at the resume, so this is based on different companies. Some companies they have to hire because they are contractors, right? So like part of the contract is like, oh, the people that work for me, the reason why I'm charging as much as I do is because they're qualified. They have a bachelor's degree, they have, a Microsoft certification or whatever. So some jobs are going to be like that. And of course, if you don't have a degree, it's going to prohibit you. And I know there's ways of validating that you actually do have your degree. I don't think there's necessarily any harm in saying that you are going to or have gone to a certain college. Just be prepared to explain that you don't have a degree. um, what about jobs that have a lot of emphasis on performance on the web? Threads and all, most boot camps usually don't teach that. You are absolutely right. There's a lot of like these things now. The latest craze is like people wanting to switch careers that do boot camps. Boot camps, I think, are anywhere between 6 to 8 weeks, so they're not terribly long, but they like cram basically, in a nutshell, all the things that you have to learn to be successful as like a web developer. Um, it kind of is a decent foundation. I think jobs who hire junior level positions or entry level positions as a web developer, they understand that your knowledge is not going to be, they probably don't know very much about threads. Um, so if they're trying to ask you that and they know that you're coming from a boot camp, that's on them. They shouldn't be asking you a question. That's like trying to ask someone, do you know dependency injection? Do you know this design pattern when they just got out of college? They probably aren't because generally you learn that from work experience. So hold on, I'm scrolling through. Mention the modules you have studied. I'm not exactly sure are you talking about. This is Ibrahim's question. Are you talking about like the programming languages I've studied and the technologies I've used?
No, Daniel was commenting about the fact that he doesn't have a degree and he's worried. But I was telling
Oh,
him I didn't have a degree, but I studied diploma, but I was able to manage people with first class degree holders when it comes to technical field and
right,
performance as well. So it's at least what you know. And from there, there are some universities who will give you a mature degree. Like once you're working, you could be doing your degree, part time, and that's how most of us,
right.
went through. Honestly, you don't even feel like it because you've already got the skills and you're working. So doing a degree alongside it is easy, and they'll even give you just 1 year degree or 2 years, and you have your degree easy.
Yeah.
Honestly, so.
Yeah, in the US, you can get something called an associate's degree as well. So that doesn't require a 4 year college. So I don't know what courses they have to do that, but I think there's more nowadays as far as associate's degrees for like software development. What do you think about certifications? Are they useful? Yes and no. Um, so I have some certifications. I have an AWS certification. I have a Azure certification, and I don't put a lot of credit into. My boss told me to take it, so I took it. And the reason why is this: I took an Azure. It's the AZ 900 exam. That's basically you knowing all the different Azure services they offer. It doesn't mean you know how to use them. It just means you know what they are. So I will say it depends on the certificate or the certification you go for. Now, if it's like an architect certification through like AWS, where you actually have to submit a project and get that project approved, that's different. That's like doing work related type stuff. But I think people can quickly understand if you take a certification and it involves like work related type activity, then I will say it's valuable. Because if you just list a bunch of certificates on your resume, but you can't answer the questions they're asking, then it probably isn't going to do you any good. It doesn't, I will say this, it's not going to hurt you. Ultimately, as an interview, I want to know if you can help me in my day to day. Are you going to be a good teammate to me and help me do the work I need to do? Sorry, I keep scrolling back to the top. So I have to keep scrolling back down. What if you studied something different but related to your undergrad? So I've had people who become developers that had like philosophy degrees. If it's related to like the IT field, of course it's going to help you. I think like if you come from something that's very different, that's like a very hard switch to do for some people. It's not impossible. It's just it's more difficult. Let's see. Oh, modules higher. So I will tell you my background. I am a computer science major. I graduated from Rutgers in New Jersey. I think the most valuable courses that I took in there were probably databases, web technologies, and I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I kind of just got really lucky with programming. So if you've been in programming for a while, there's a programming language called Pascal. So this is
Pascal, okay.
yeah, this is like way back in 1996. Okay, so this is a while ago. Pascal is traditionally known as like more of a teaching language. It's a functional programming language. And that was my first language that I learned that I really fell in love with. I was like, oh, this is so cool. I know how to do this. I can make it do that. And then I actually went to college to be an engineer, electrical engineer. And then I was like doing okay, but I wasn't enjoying it. And I was like, oh, all my core classes I can apply to computer science. So then I switched over to computer science. And I was like, I'm done. That's what I want to do. So typically, how many lines of code do you write in a day? Oh, you're putting me on the spot. Oh, so is anyone from here from my workplace? Okay, so you have to keep this quiet. So I'm actually trying to get a promotion at work right now, and I'm actually trying to get into like a software management position. And at least for my current employer, as a manager, you are basically not doing coding. So I'm actually doing less coding now than I was before, but I will tell you this, because of how our work is structured, if you know what a pull request is, it's basically you have work that you're trying to do, like you're building a new widget or you're fixing a bug, all right? And when someone submits a pull request, what that is, at least at our workplace, two people have to look at the work that you did and look through it and make sure it's correct. So I might not necessarily write lines of code every day, but I'm certainly going through some other people's code and proofreading the work like, you don't want to do it this way. This is a better way. Or how does that change, if you change this, how does it affect all the other pieces of code that it touches? So typically in a day, I'm probably, I don't know, I'm looking at maybe between 500 and 1,000 lines of code. It sounds impressive, but it's not really that impressive.
That's a lifetime you're gonna finish.
Yeah. And sometimes the amount of code you write is not necessarily good. In my opinion, a good developer, based on who they work with, you have to write efficient code, but the code has to be readable. And that's probably why I don't like Python. I don't like Python because there are some amazing Python programmers out there. Like it takes me 20 lines of code and they can write the same functionality in like 3 lines of code. But I don't understand it because it's so short and concise, because I don't know the Python syntax so well. So part of it is writing good code, but it's also like if someone else can look at your code and they can understand what's going on, that's also like, in my opinion, good code as well. Do you recommend putting Udacity, Coursera, and edX certifications on the resume? It doesn't hurt. I will say that as you, if you once you get into software development and you spend 5, 10, 15, 20 years on your resume goes from 1 pages to like 5 pages because maybe you're changing jobs, maybe you're adding new skills. And so a recruiter is not going to want to look at your resume that's like 5 pages long sometimes because all the older experience doesn't relate to the job you're trying to go for now. So I would say the answer to that depends. If it is related to the job that you're applying for, yes. But if it's not, take it off. And I don't, that's another point. If you're interviewing and you're writing a resume, cater the resume to the position you're applying for. So your resume doesn't have to be the same for every place you're applying to. You want to make the things stand out that are applicable to the position you're going for. I learned Pascal in college. That is an old-fashioned programming language. Yes, it is. I feel very old. I started with C++. I hate that class. Yes, me too. I hate pointers. I like it when my programming language does everything for me. So I admit I'm lazy. My pointers were flying all over the place. But if you can do C++, more power to you. Push and pull and version control, yes. Short functional code is better than longer code that does the same things. Yes. I will say if you work on a team that is used to short code and everyone can understand it, I say yes. But if you're on a team that doesn't normally write that way, you also is like, if we have this term, it's called bus factor, right? Meaning, like if I tell someone, hey, the bus factor is really low, that means like if 3 developers know this code really well and no one else knows that code, and they all get put on a bus and they die, guess what? Somebody else who's not familiar with your code has to look at your code and try to understand what you did. So usually companies will have something called best practice. They'll have coding standards. And so generally, if you write using that coding standard, everyone should generally understand what you do. I have 2 to 3 years of embedded development experience. Any advice for moving to web development? Yes. Okay, so I'm not too familiar with embedded web development. Avish, can you tell me like what programming languages you use with embedded development?
Hey, I used mainly C programming language. We were
See?
doing a lot of so it was an auto vehicle manufacturer,
Okay.
and we did the development of the control boards for the vehicles
So you guys are
in-house. So
smart.
it was well, the senior engineers were, but I wouldn't put myself in that department quite yet.
See, to me, that is like that is so cool. I could never do that, and I've been doing programming for 20 years, 20 plus years. Like that to me is cool. So anyway, to answer your question, so I think if you know the basic concepts of programming with C, I would venture to say C, you have loops, conditional statements, I guess there's recursion, there's methods that you call methods. So like those concepts of programming translate to other things. When you work with like enterprise web applications, generally they're going to be object oriented. Generally, so it's not like 100% that's correct. I would start with something like C# or Java. Something that's really easy to get into for web development is Node.js. Node.js or JavaScript, you can spin up a web server in like 5 lines of code. like Express.js. And it's pretty easy to learn the syntax. So actually, let me go Express.js. And actually, I think it's like, you run this line of code from your command line, and gosh, you like do that, and there's another sample. Where's the other line of code? So like if you just run this, there's like, you have a web server running in like, I don't know, 5 lines of code. You have to go like hello world, Node.js. So I would learn like C# or Java and like maybe like JS. So JavaScript 20 years ago is definitely not what it was today. You can basically do a lot of things in JavaScript.
Okay.
Fortran, that's another
Thanks.
old one. Geez. What's your preferred approach to interviewing someone? Project-based interview or language depth interview? Which would you recommend one to prepare towards? The answer is yes. Here's the problem. I don't know the company and the methodology about interviewing. So I would tell you this from, if I were to interview, I would prepare myself the best I could. I would, so if a company gives you, I need you to write a sample project, like let's say I want you to write a web app that converts Celsius to Fahrenheit. All right. I did this one time and I think I messed up. I did the code and I zipped up a file and I sent it to them. That was probably the worst thing I ever did. Like, I think my expectation would be you write the code, you put your code up on GitHub, because that shows that you're used to version control. Because most companies that do continuous integration and continuous development, you have to know how to work with Git. And so that's like a project-based interview. Now, language depth interview, you have to know your language inside and out. So if I'm interviewing a senior developer, I expect them to understand the concepts of, like we work with .NET Core, so I expect them to be familiar with some very common things you use with .NET Core, very common things you use with Angular, common things you use with a database. Like one of the most common questions I have for someone is, all right, we have our website running. Customer calls you. They're experiencing performance issues. They're hitting a web page and they click a button to search for all your stuff, and it's just hanging there. What do you do? Okay, that's a real world question and a real world thing that you have to handle on the job. And so it lets me know this person has been in this situation. It's like, okay. And then I expect them to ask me questions. Usually I'm going to give you a question that does not have enough detail. And I expect you to ask, like, to try to answer it and then ask some questions, because that's my job, people. I'm going to make this really simple. To be a really good programmer, you have to code and you have to be able to Google. I don't know what programming was like 20 years ago before Google wasn't around. You couldn't look up the answer to your question. It was super hard. And somehow I made it this hard. But nowadays, if I don't know the answer to figure out something, my code's not compiling, it's not building, I can look it up on Google. And chances are there are 10 other people that have had that problem. Thanks, Barry. Appreciate it. Why would you choose AI as a web developer? That is a really good question. So again, it's kind of back to this. Don't put the cart before the horse, right? So I know there was like some questions in the Slack channels before, like I want to make a chat bot so people can talk on the chat bot to answer questions, commonly asked questions. So that's like a good use case for AI, right? Another use case for AI is like Google is a really good example, right? Like if I go here and I go to Google and I go, let's see, it already knows what I'm thinking, which is like a little scary, but that's a good use for AI. So there's all these things that I can incorporate AI algorithms to enhance the functionality of like my web application. Yeah, reading books, for sure. You can still buy books too. Some people like that, and I say there's no right or wrong way. It's like whatever way works for you best to learn. All right, I'm gonna stop presenting. All right, So we are at 7 o'clock. I appreciate everybody for joining. You guys are all awesome. Hopefully, I didn't sound too like crazy or foolish. My coworkers say I have a tendency to ramble. But yeah, if you have
Thank you,
any,
Timothy.
yeah, if you have any questions like afterwards, you know where to reach me in Slack. I'll do the best I can. And again, that's just based on my experience. Um, but yeah, as a someone who interviews and has interviewed someone else and interviews me, I understand how that can be stressful. But yeah, just take it one step at a time and just try to learn from your interviews and get really better. I think one of the other things that you can do is you have friends who are in the industry that can help prepare you by doing like mock interviews. You can also
Ectoparasites. We call that ectoparasites.
you can go on YouTube and do programming interviews and look at all the types of like mock interviews they do on there.
Okay,
So
Tim, is there
yes.
any resources that you put for us? Like, for instance, I know it's a bit of tasking. Um, for the best programming languages to start, like you mentioned Stack Overflow, where to ask questions if you are stuck when you are in the job, because sometimes you might overhyped your CV and you'll be picked, and then you'll be given a project.
Oh
You'll be
yeah.
stuck. You don't know where to go. You don't know who to fall onto. Friends will abandon you, and you'll be like scratching. God, I'm gonna lose this job. So, is there any ideas like website or links
Okay. So let
people
me
you could
give you.
just readily fall onto? Thank
All
you.
right. Some people don't like this, but I'm gonna try to do that. So
It's part of the cheat sheet anyway.
yeah. So there's a bunch of websites like this. So Leak Code is one of these sites that people use to like brush up on their programming language. So it's like I can let me see if I can sign in. So basically, you have these websites that have programming challenges, and you can use whatever programming language you want, and you can try to meet that challenge. So like if I go here and I go to problems, and I want, let's say the daily challenge. Actually, this one's pretty, let's go back. Let's go to easy one. Sum two numbers. So you click on this, and you go in, let's skip this. Given an array of integers and a integer target, return the indices of the two numbers such they add up to the target. So it's basically adding. So like, here's where you can change the programming language to what you're trying to get better at. And then you can like submit your code and it will run it across a bunch of different scenarios to test your code out. So Leak Code is like one of the websites where you can kind of test and get better at programming. And these are good because you have a problem and you need a programming language to solve it. So that's one way to do it. The other way that I can recommend is like picking a project like we talked about and actually implementing the project with your programming language of choice.
Thank you so much, because
Yeah.
that's very important, honestly, in programming.
It is, like I said, it's an art form. So you really, just like arts, right? Like I knew a kid in high school, he couldn't draw a stick figure. And after the 4 years of high school, by the end of high school, he was a really good artist. He knew he was not good at the beginning, but he kept working at it. And programming is the same way. It's really like an art form. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So I think my biggest tip for people who are new to programming is spend like, have a consistency of schedule. Try to spend 30 minutes to 60 minutes a day working at your programming language. Even me, when I'm trying to learn a new programming language, if I don't do it every day, I'm going to get good at it. And then when I stop working at it, I'm going to forget things. So just do a little bit every day, and that's certainly going to help you. All right.
Just to recap, you said Node.js is the best to start with as a newbie, or
It's
Java or
it's a
Python.
good, yeah, it's a good start. Like I said, it depends on what you want to do. I think I like
Like
uh,
for software development in terms of SDETs, automation, and stuff like that.
yeah.
Data scraping or data extraction.
Yeah, so as a web developer, sorry, I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm biased, so let's see. Let me see. So like this is what I typically use, but you know, if I go to Microsoft site, you know, there's a walkthrough from the beginning to the end on how to do something. It is a little bit cumbersome, but I can get a out of the box running website like by just starting a new project. Let me see if I can do this. All right, I'm going to use Visual Studio. All right, so if I want to build a website, I'm going to start a new project. Come on. This is a working demo. It always freezes when I do this on a presentation. And I don't know why that is. It just knows I'm presenting. All right, so I want to build a website. No console. I want all projects. I'm going to make a ASP.NET Core web application, Udacity demo, and where's MVC? With Angular, we'll do with, no, web app. Yeah, like already I would imagine if you're not used to this, it's like, what the heck do I choose? I'm choosing what I know. But what it will do is create like a default project for you. And of course it's taking a while. It's because I have like the video recording software running. And I'll automatically have all this code ready. So if I hit run, hold on. Come on. I'm putting pressure on my work laptop. It doesn't want to perform. Ah, there we go. Good girl. All right. So I already have a website. I've got some links. And it's like, how do I change it? That's kind of where you go into like tutorials. You can do the same thing for like Node and stuff like that. For Node applications,
Is this a VS? VS.
this is just regular Visual Studio. You can do this
Studio. Okay.
with the newer .NET technology. You can do the same thing from with Visual Studio Code. It's just I find it much easier to do it through here.
To do VS. Okay.
Yeah. I'm used to this, so it's easy for me. So it might not what's easy for me might not be easy for you.
People have said it a lot. I have a friend that does coding. I'm a bit studying Java, but he says when you start with VS like C#, it's really pretty straightforward. He managed to land a job within a few months of studying C# because they'll pick you up and then they'll train you on other languages. So I reckon I'm gonna take that as well. That advice.
And this is what I was talking about before. This is Express.js, which runs off of Node.js. 11 lines of code, and I have a web server. So if you want to do that, like I can probably do that really quickly.
But just to clarify, Timothy, this is only gonna run like Node.js code. If I try to put PHP on this Node.js server, it's not gonna work, right?
Correct. It will not work.
Okay.
So like everything's kind of pigeonholed to like that specific technology. Like PHP is purely web-based, yes. PHP is actually, I won't say it's like terribly hard to learn. The syntax is kind of funky, but PHP is like another one that's prevalently used. C#. So there's a lot of C# stuff that's out there. It's I think the .NET ecosystem. If you look at that Stack Overflow survey, it's one of the most like loved ecosystems by developers. Let's see if I can find it. Where is it? Let me see if I can. .NET. So here we go. Web frameworks: jQuery, React, Angular, ASP.NET. Number 4 is not too bad. And it's also number 6. The older stuff is not .NET. The newer stuff is .NET Core. So if you're going to do C# stuff, do .NET Core. Let's see. Most loved, wanted web frameworks, ASP.NET Core. The most hated, AngularJS. AngularJS is really old. React is another one. So yeah, that's kind of my. So if you all are looking for help with .NET stuff, I can certainly help you with .NET outside of today. So, all right. Anything else before we go? All right, awesome. All right, I'll give you. I'm sorry, I went 11 minutes over. I will try to put this recording up, and I'll share the slides in the, I guess, the AMA channel. So, all right, everybody, thanks for joining, and best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Timothy.
Tim. Thank you. Very
Thanks.
interactive.
Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you, Timothy.